Up until I started work with Iowa Select, I really didn't have any experience. We had one boar stud that I worked with that was filtered. So learned a lot of things kind of in the last few years, some the easy way, some the hard way. And I think that's our company in general. We went into it pretty full steam ahead and learned a lot of things along the way. And I've talked a little bit about our remodel process and some of the more basics around the positive pressure filtration previously, so I didn't include a lot of that in this presentation. It was more some of the results and the numbers. If you guys got some specific questions around it, because it is a different building design or a different ventilation design completely from the negative pressure, feel free to ask any questions too. I got just a brief summary in there, but I'll talk a little bit about what we've seen for results, both with new PRRS breaks in farms and then also with some of the production numbers we've seen since we've been implementing this. This is a slide that shows our geography, and so we've got one sow farm located in Ewing, Nebraska, which is a pretty isolated farm. It's been stable and pretty good health for a number of years. And then we've got some sow farms down here in southern Iowa. We've got a little bit of disease pressure kind of in this Clark County area. Traditionally, these farms have been in a pretty good location and not as much disease pressure as what we have up here in central and north central Iowa. So most of our pigs, traditionally, most of our sows have been located kind of right in this Wright, Franklin, Hamilton, Hardin County area, which are very, very swine dense areas in north central Iowa. So a lot of disease pressure, a lot of PRRS. And then you can see all the colored counties are all counties where we have nurseries or finishing or wean to finish sites. So if you kind of draw a line, you can pretty much go most of the western 2/3 of the state, and in the northern half of the state, we've got finishing in all those counties. So a lot of pigs where everybody else has a lot of pigs as well. So in the last 3 years, we've done a lot on our facilities. So we've remodeled 18 different sow farms and GDUs in the last 3 years. We're going to start. We kind of took a break here on the remodel as we finished up some of our new construction, but we're going to start remodeling some farms again next summer. What really drove some of the remodel process was a couple things. Number one, we wanted to, our relationship with our packer agreement drove us towards going to pen gestation. So we needed to get that implemented. And so to do that, we needed to remodel some of our facilities. And so we did a couple of those prior to remodeling for the filtration. And as we got some of those done, it was kind of like, if we're going to consider doing this, we might as well do it all in one fell swoop. It's going to be cheaper than going back, doing one set of remodel and then going back and doing another set of remodels. Obviously, so the pen gestation was a big part of it. The air filtration was a big part of it. Those were probably the two, drivers. But we needed to do a lot of extensive repairs, a lot of maintenance needed on these facilities. They're 20 to 25-year-old sow farms, so there's going to be, a time when this was needed. So it was kind of a convergence of all these factors. The other thing is, there's started to get to be a lot of data that negative pressure filtration was effective, and there was a payback on that. And we had a boar stud sitting in a very swine dense area. I should find some wood to knock on every time I talk about that, but it has stayed negative. It's been under positive pressure filtration, and that's HEPA filtered, so some pretty heavy duty filters there. And so that's kind of been what we've done for remodels to the positive pressure filtration. And then with our expansion, with some of the increased packing capacity in the United States, it's allowed us an opportunity to expand. And so we've built 5 new sow farms that are up and running now, and then we've got 4 currently in construction. One we'll put our first gilts into, ready to farrow. I think they go in October 10th, so coming up pretty quick. And then we got 3 more we'll finish up this year. And really with the expansion, Jeff, our owner, really likes being in Iowa. It's right in his backyard. There's a lot of good people with animal caretaker skills in Iowa. The state regulations are very friendly towards farming in Iowa, so there's a lot of good reasons. So he looked for opportunities. He wanted to stay in Iowa, and so we thought the filtration was something that was an important part of that in order to be successful raising pigs in Iowa. And then also we built 3 new GDUs as well, in addition to the 7 that we remodeled. So some of the reasons, so it's kind of like, people have been filtering farms for years. We decided to do positive pressure. Well, let me put it this way. We never thought that we would probably be able to be very successful with negative pressure due to the fact our facilities just were never designed to be filtered. There's a lot of opportunities for the air leakage that Kevin talked about. They're certainly not tight. We would probably use every tube of caulk in the United States trying to get them tight. And so to feel like to be successful, we would need to do the positive pressure model. And so probably, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we would not have been able to do the positive pressure ventilation because some of the technology or tools that we needed weren't there. And so some of the things that have allowed us, I just threw a few bullet points up here, and I'll show a slide, so our positive pressure ventilation is an overhead ventilation system. So the air is pumped into the attic basically from outside and then comes down into the animal living space rather than being pressured in the animal living space and leaking up into the attic and deteriorating with the humidity from those animals. The new controllers that are out there, we're using the FanCom controller. I know others are using the Maximus controller. We've liked the FanCom. I know others have really liked the Maximus, but those allow you to run the static pressure very accurately, the differentials between the room and the attic, the outside. They allow you to access it all remotely and make changes as you need based off of different environmental conditions. Some of the panelized building structures have allowed us, within the walls, allowed us the opportunity, to have those panelized structures and not have the moisture again creep in and start rotting the facility. We've used a lot of materials like stainless steel screws and aluminum for the roofs or for the ceilings in the barns. And then probably one of the biggest things is the Munters fans that we use. They're variable output. They're capable of operating under very high pressures. The motors don't burn out. They're a direct drive fan. They're very low maintenance. As far as I know, we've not had to replace a single one of those fan motors since we started, other than we did have a large power surge in one of our farms that kind of fried everything. But just under normal operating conditions, we haven't had to replace any of those fan motors. So they've been very reliable and very maintenance-free. This is just a schematic of what a cross-section of one of our barns looks like. So this would be, so on our new farms, we would have most of our filters be on a gable ends. So the end walls on a double-wide barn basically would be, or be wider than that. But this would be kind of a cross-section on one of our remodel farms. And what we did is we went in to the roof line. This is the old roof line. And then we extended it out at a flatter angle. And then these fans would be up in that space between the old roof line and the new roof line. And then extended out, there's basically two spaces. You could extend this out a little wider. The cool cell would be out here. But just for simplicity, the air pulls in through the filters into this space. It's sucked up into the attic. And then these inlets open and close. And we have basically a PVC plank that runs over a shutter wall that raises and lowers. And those function, those raise and lower based off of temperature in the barn, but the fans actually kick up based off the pressure of the attic. So as these open, it's getting hot outside, the shutter wall opens, the inlet's open, then the attic starts losing its pressure, and then that's what causes the fans to ramp up. So the controllers can manage all that pressure difference, the temperature. We can do, we have, in our farms we have 10 farrowing rooms. I don't know how many you can put on one controller, but we have up to 10 farrowing rooms on one controller that'll do all that control. Some things on filter media considerations. So I guess this is best carried by the numbers, so now we can get into some of the numbers. But we started, like I said, we didn't have a lot of experience. We thought we could put a commonly used filter in our facilities, and we would probably get 3 years out of it. So we started with some electrostatic filters, and what we saw was very quickly we started seeing a pretty precipitous drop in the MERV rating on those when we sent them in for testing. And so we were down by, in the 11 to 12 MERV rating by 18 months. We'd actually, in been about a year after we filtered the first farm, we started seeing that dropping down into that 12, 13 range, and we paired a MERV 12 pre-filter with the filter that was on there, and then did some testing, and we thought, okay, that bumped us back up to MERV 14, MERV 15. We'll reassess that in the fall time before we get into PRRS season. Well, last year at Leman conference, I got a call from that farm that they had some sows off feed and some abortions, and we had just pulled those filter combos and sent them in for testing. And so, I called our engineer. I said, hey, did we get those results back? He said, no, not yet. And I told him what was going on, so we were all nervous. And, and they did break with PRRS, and we got those results back, and that's what you see up here. We had a lot of MERV 11, MERV 12 type results coming through there. Certainly, Kevin could probably tell you better than I, but I think at a MERV 11, MERV 12, you're probably getting somewhere between 60 to 80% of your particle, 1 to 3 micron size particles through there, which we know viable infectious PRRS virus can ride on. So we were getting a lot of infectious virus through those filters for sure. So at that point in time, we said, what we should probably do is rip all those out of our facilities and put brand new filters in everywhere. So that's what we did. We went and put physical media in there that's going to physically filter rather than rely on electrostatic charges. And so we've had 3 sow farms break with PRRS with new virus introductions after we got the farm totally filtered and all the sows in. And those 3 farms were all from electrostatic charged filters. Knock on wood, so far we've had good luck on our sow farms with the physical media. One of our concerns with that is you cannot get the same airflow rate through that media, and so we've been testing that. I think we've got some now that are just getting to be close to 2 years. We'd already went down the road of starting to use a different type of filter, and so we got those in there. We started testing those, and I know the last ones I saw were from last spring, about 18-month-old filters, and we had seen just a slight drop on airflow through those, but still plenty of airflow to keep our summer ventilation rates up and keep those sows really comfortable in the summertime. So right now where we're at as a system is we've got 60% of our system currently under filtration. Most of that is positive pressure filtration. We've got 44 total years if you've added all up, sow farm years, 33 in the sow farms, and then a little over 15 years in the GDUs. Those are 18 remodeled sow farms, 5 brand new sow farms, 7 remodeled GDUs, and 3 new GDUs. So that's kind of how it all breaks down. But we've got quite a bit of years of experience under our belt now, going from 0 years to 44 years pretty quick. So kind of looking at our PRRS incident since we started, what I did is I kind of cut out those southern Iowa farms because they're really low. Those farms usually didn't break with PRRS anyways. And I just put in our central and north central Iowa sow farms, so that'd be 21 of the 23 filtered sow farms that we have. So we've got a total of 30 years on those 21 sow farms, and we've had those 3 PRRS breaks since we started. We also had 2 additional PRRS breaks where we did an off-site breeding project. We depopped, and as we took those last sows back off, we pretty much rolled the new sows on a week later, and we didn't get those farms totally populated before they broke with PRRS. So we think we had some issues. Either they picked PRRS up before we put them in there, we picked it up in transit, or we didn't get the facilities. We didn't completely eliminate it from the facilities. But so if we don't count those 2 breaks, we're at about a 10% annual break rate. If we do count those 2 breaks, we're at about a 16 to 17% annual break rate. And so, the other thing is we've had a couple farms where we've thought we eliminated the virus and we put gilts back in. So we had, a lot of these farms are positive when we started. We did PRRS eliminations. We have a couple where we put gilts back in and we found basically like a 99-point-something% match to the resident strain that we had in there 3 or 4 months before we put the gilts back in. No clinical signs. We said, well, that's probably not a new break, but you can't rule that out either. Certainly there's plenty of 174 circulating around, but you'd say, well, it's pretty close, no clinical signs. We think we probably just never truly eradicated it. But we're getting to the point now where we're getting a lot of these farms finally cleaned up and negative, and getting the vast majority of our filtered sow farms producing PRRS negative pigs. Traditionally, if you look at our break rate in the same geographical area, we're about 85% break rate on our sow farm. So that's a pretty good 5 to 8x reduction on new PRRS breaks from what we've seen so far with our filtration. And then we've gotten, we're kind of coming into our third winter, so to say. But they all kind of came off at different times. A lot of ours got filtered in the winter, fall or winter, so wouldn't say we've really skewed it seasonally. This is kind of looking at this. So this is just a different way of looking at it, just kind of a survival at different farms. So this is months post-filtration or pre-filtration and new PRRS virus introductions. I quit updating this just because as I got further back this way into the past, that data is, forgotten over time or not very accurate. But what we've seen, we got those 5 sow farm breaks that I mentioned, the 2 that happened during stocking, and then the 3 other ones, and then kind of all the past history of those same exact farms. So you're not looking at these years compared to those years. You look at the same farm pre and post, and we've seen about a real similar. If we don't count those 2, we're pushing an 8x. If we do count them, we're at 4.5x. So real similar to the 2 ways we look at it. We think that's what we're seeing, somewhere in that 5 to 8x reduction in new virus introductions. Which, it feels really terrible when you have one break with PRRS. It feels, gut-wrenching. But, looking at some of the data earlier this morning, I think that those numbers are probably fairly good compared to the negative pressure filtration. And we know for a fact we have plenty of virus challenge in our neighborhood. So we know we're challenging them probably every day. This was some data that Iowa State University helped us with. And so we looked at the same sow farms before and after filtration as we got into some of these. These are some closeouts. These are some farms never filtered before filtration, after filtration. One thing that's important is a lot of these farms were PRRS positive before filtration. They're still PRRS positive after filtration. When we did this, we didn't have the virus eliminated from them yet. So we're comparing, basically not having new PRRS breaks on our mortality. So the ones we never filtered tended to be the ones more in southern Iowa, in our wean to finish mortality, where this is, we went from 11% down to a 9.5% just off the first 85 closeouts off those farms, which aren't exactly record-breaking numbers, but that's a good reduction right off the bat, even before we got PRRS eliminated from some of those farms. From a GDU filtration, so our GDUs, all except for one, are located within a 1 mile of commercial pigs, and typically we would assume PRRS positive commercial pigs. We try to place only negative wean pigs within a 2 mile radius of all of our sow farms and GDUs, but we do have a lot of other people's pigs. We got one GDU where there's 2 other barns on the same section that we can have any control over. So overall PRRS breaks in our filtered GDUs, we've got, like I said, about 15 years of filtration. The first 8 years worth of filtration, we had 0 PRRS breaks. And then after New Year's of last year, we went through a bad stretch. We had 4 breaks in what would basically be the last 7 years. 2, we know it was in our gilt grow outs that are unfiltered, and we moved them into the facilities, and we just missed it on testing. We were testing the facility every week, but we did not detect the virus until after we moved those gilts. So that one certainly wasn't related to filters, but PRRS break is a PRRS break. So if that's not our least, common or our weakest link in our chain, we got to take care of that. We had one that we believe was related to some transportation contamination based off the sequence. It looked like some PRRS we knew we had in one geographical area where the truck wash was at. We had some issues with a truck driver truck drivers not getting staged in the right order. And so we think that was related to a transport contamination. And then we had one that we do think was related to some aerosol transmissions. So one thing we've done is just a couple, and so we learned a lot of things the hard way, but we put windbreaks up on all of our exhaust shutters right off the bat, because we could see when it was windy, that wind could overcome the pressure of the air coming out, and it slapped those shutters shut. And some of those would flip up when we get air coming back in. And the other thing it would do is force the air up coming out of the exhaust. And as it forced it up, we wouldn't pull that air from that hog barn into the next barn's filters, and it saved on our pre-filter lifespan. And so we got kind of a double value out of it. So this facility just got done, and the ground was frozen, so we put these temporary windbreaks up that kind of sat kind of as a teepee over it, but they didn't have enough exhaust for summertime ventilation. So we ripped those out in the spring, and then before we got them up, there was about a 2-week gap, and that's when we detected PRRS in that facility on our routine testing. The other thing is we had a stainless steel grid that's a 2x3 grid that those filters fit into, and they'd always been too wide and 3 high, and they got rotated 90 degrees in the building plans for that facility for whatever reason. Well, the clips were supposed to sit top and bottom, and they sat side to side because of the way they flipped them. And so when those filters went in, with the pleats facing vertical, the frames are different on the top compared to the sides, and so they would actually slip and slide down. And so we went and did investigation. You could find gaps between as they slid and kind of kicked out at the bottom some gaps. And you can see dust streaks up on a bunch of those. So we know we had a lot of bypass there, whether through the windbreak or through that. And so we don't know, but we couldn't find any other reason to think why that GDU would have broke. Our performance has been very good. We've got the best conception rates and gilt numbers and farrowing that we've ever had in our system. So just being able to continue to keep PRRS negative gilts rolling into our farms has been just really great. Been healthy gilts, been really good selection rates on our gilts, lower cull rates. It's allowed us now that we've got some of these going, we don't have to do our breed projects for new farms and unfiltered facilities. We can do the breed projects in these GDUs. So we've kind of built the GDUs ahead of the sow farms, so we have more GDU space than we need for sow farms. And then as we get our last sow farms done, we'll do the breed projects in the sow farms, and then a filtered GDU space will roll perfectly into our sow farm space. So if you look at that, we're at a 26% break rate, so higher than what we are on our sow farms for sure. And a lot of that is just the risk of where we got our gilts coming from. Our gilts are coming in from unfiltered farms, whereas with our filtered sow farms, they're coming from these filtered GDUs. So if you look at comparison of these similar geography of our GDUs, we had 10 out of 16 of our central Iowa GDUs break with PRRS in 2016. So that's a 63% break rate. The five of the 6 that didn't break, we had gilts in that we LVI'd for sow farm shutdowns. So, they're PRRS positive. That's all I can really tell you about them. They may have had a lateral break. May have been more than one strain in there. But so depending on how you look at that, if you call it 10 out of 16 or 15 out of 16, we're somewhere in that 2 to 3x reduction rate in PRRS in our GDUs. So we definitely need to get better. In protecting our GDUs. And really where we focus there is just on our testing of our gilt grow out. So we're testing a lot more samples a lot more often. So twice a week on a bunch of samples per room. I'm talking about seasonal PRRS stability. So going back to last year, week 31 last year, as we got a bunch of these farms finished up from the remodels, we were sitting, whether they were filtered or unfiltered farms, we were sitting at just over 40% of our sows PRRS negative. These sow farms that are unfiltered, we got about half that we actually got a triple net lease on the facilities, so they're not ours, so we're not going to, at this point in time, make the investment in it. The other half are in pretty good. Traditionally, about every 5 years, they break with PRRS in southern Iowa, so we were not going to remodel those. And so what happened this winter was basically all those ones in southern Iowa that we never hardly broke with PRRS once every 5 years, all decided to break with PRRS in the same year. So right now our unfiltered sow farm base is down to about one farm that's not PRRS positive. So we got some PRRS cleanups going on there, so that we'll get that back up. But we certainly didn't have a very good year this year. I think generally in the industry, the reports are about a 30% increase in PRRS incidence in 2017-2018 season. So we definitely noticed that on some of our farms that we traditionally didn't see that in. However, our PRRS positive farms, as we got some of these into shutdown, we're starting to pull some of them out now. We had those breaks last fall that we talked about here and here, but now we're starting to step up some more farms. We got 4 more coming off here in the next month, so we should be setting. Actually, 2 of them are coming off this week, and then another 2. So we should be setting up about that 80% range of our filtered farms producing PRRS negative pigs. The hard part with our system is we can't just go shut them all down at once because we breed all of our gilts off site. That's why we have filtered GDUs. So to do a closure and elimination, if we try doing that in our whole system, our wean pig throughput would just go boom, So we kind of got to stage some of these, so we can't just pull them all off at once. So we pick the ones that we think we get the most value out of to start with. This is our wean pigs. Pigs weaned per week out of these farms, standardized to a 4,200 head sow farm with the gilt breeding. Basically, the gilts don't enter until they're on average, about 12 weeks or 10 to 12 weeks of gestation. So we've seen a pretty nice increase from running in that 2,200 pigs neck of the woods up to bump into 2,500 on these farms. So especially here just lately, we've really started noticing, starting to come into some of the fruits of those farms. And definitely if you put a trend line on there, it'd be a pretty good trend line, although it starts kind of at a bad time of the year to be, starting obviously with wean pig throughput. But we see a nice increase. These would be just our filtered farms wean pig output. This is our born alive, and so I haven't updated this since last spring. The trend has continued to rise on these farms. Right now we're kind of at an all-time high, so these, what I did is I took all the weeks going back to the beginning of 2017 when we started getting our first filtered farms coming through, and then as each week when the farm switched from being non-filtered to filtered, I kind of changed the classification. And so this would be our trend line for our filtered farms born alive, and then this would be our trend line for our non-filtered farms born alive. So as we had all those PRRS breaks through this winter here, kind of starting this fall, the trend lines actually went from going up to coming down, where this one's kind of kept a steady trend line up with a little bit of seasonal activity in there. So opposite trend lines between our two systems. If you look at our non-filtered farms, the same farms in Q1, which is a tough quarter for wean pig throughput, born alive was at 12.4 2 years in a row, and Q1 of 2018, 13.1. Whereas our non-filtered farms, we saw basically the exact same number, which is a better number, but we got a 0.7 bump in born alive in our farms that we filtered compared to where they're at historically. Pre-weaning mortality, as we kind of came, this goes back to the first of the year when some of our non-filtered farms started breaking. But you can see our filtered farm pre-wean mortality, other than a little few weeks here, has stayed an average of about 1% lower than our non-filtered farms, going back to the beginning of the year. Our abortion rates, again, really flat and stable through the seasonality. And these are all farms, again, pretty much all located in central Iowa. Again, we had a little bit of activity in some of these, but no major blips like we've had here and here. If you just do it on an average on a 4,000 head sow farm, that's about 150 fewer abortions per farm per year, comparing our filtered farms to our non-filtered farms. If you look at our farrowing rate, we've seen about a 1.5% better farrowing rate for our filtered farms if you go back to the beginning of the PRRS season. So just going back to week 42 is kind of what we call the beginning of PRRS season. And if you just go back to there and just follow our farrowing rate through the springtime, through the PRRS season, about a 1.4% better farrowing rate. And then wean-to-market mortality. Again, we've had, going back to the fall, between the fall and now, we've had a really flat trend on our wean-to-market mortality in our filtered farms, and we've had a pretty good increase in our non-filtered farms. If you look at those numbers compared to where we were at before on these farms, it's about 2.6% lower wean-to-market mortality. And like I said, we haven't even got these farms all PRRS negative yet, so we expect that to continue to look better. But just on that number, it comes out to about 2,500 fewer dead market hogs a year on a 4,200 head sow farm. So a lot less volatility, definitely still some seasonality in there, but a lot less volatility than what over the past year. So that's a full year working through there. And you can see we were coming down out of some PRRS issues last spring on some of those farms that got filtered, but we had a couple that got filtered basically in the middle of a PRRS break, so certainly not the greatest numbers to start with on some of those. This is just a weekly, it's not exact, actually it's an 8-day mortality divided by inventory, not starting inventory, so you can't put a ton of stock into this number over here, but it basically just shows you a trend over time of our wean-to-market mortality. These would be our 18 remodeled sow farms. So this is the mortality of those 18 farms, wean-to-market, going back to week 1 of 2017, and just following that down over time. Really, if you put, an SPC chart to it, we've been below that lower control limit for several weeks, a lot of weeks in a row now, but definitely seeing a really big step change in our wean-to-market performance. If you kind of roll it all up, looking at it all those different ways, about a 0.4, and these are pretty conservative, but a 0.4 improvement on born alive, 2.8 more litters per week, 1% improvement in pre-wean, about 6,000, pushing 6,000 more pigs weaned per year, 2,500 less wean-to-market mortality per year out of a 4,200 head sow farm. So, just rolling those numbers up conservatively, 8,000 more market pigs per year on a 4,200 head sow farm, which on those 18 remodel farms is almost 200,000 more market hogs a year compared to what they were doing before when they were unfiltered. Honestly, it's probably better than that. That's pretty conservative. I know we've got some farms where we went from about 23 to 24 PSY to 29 to 30 PSY. So if you just do the real quick math on that, if you can get 4 PSY on a 4,000 head sow farm, that's 16,000 more wean pigs out the door. I know the first farm that we filtered, we got almost 20,000 more pigs out the year after it was filtered compared to the year before. And like I said, I don't think we've really reached our full potential there yet either. So in the past 3 years, we went from 2% of our system to 60% of our system filtered, including our GDUs, most of our GDUs anyways at this point in time. We've seen about a 5 to 8x reduction on new PRRS introductions into our sow farms in the swine dense areas. We've seen more like a 2 to 3x reduction on our GDUs. So we know that filtration, and those aren't filter related, so we've got to shore up all those other issues. And probably a pretty conservative number of 8,000 more market pigs per year out of our filter farms, but we've seen some where we've had 20,000 pigs weaned out of those farms compared to before. And then the other thing I'll mention is when we filtered these farms, we didn't just filter them. We did a lot of other things related to the biosecurity of those farms in terms of supply entries, people entries, dead removal, transition rooms for trailers, cold trailers, and wean pig trailers that back up.